The town of Scituate's 2022 May elections are Saturday, May 21st, from 8 a.m. until 6 p.m. in that high school gym. And if you get your 2022 ballot and think it looks a little like the 2021 ballot, you're not alone. Why?
Because once again, there's only one contested race.
And once again, that falls underneath that school committee. What's different this time is that there are 2 seats up for grabs. In position 1, it's Carrie Borkowski and Michelle Kramer. In position 2, Nicole Brandolini and Richard Taft. Richard Taft has been very critical of that current school committee on many fronts. He says he's also concerned that political activism is taking priority over education. Richard Taft sat down with Scituate TV to talk about all that and much more. Right now, your chance to meet Richard Taft. Richard Taft, almost 1 year ago to the day, you and I sat here in the exact same chairs. And your first attempt for that school committee. Since then, in the fall of 2021, you did try again. And now here we are, the 3rd attempt at that school committee. I do have to say that needs to be acknowledged and applauded. That persistence, that dedication, absolutely, absolutely. Well done, well done. Well, look, you know the drill here. You know what we're going to do. We got a lot of questions to go over. But first and foremost, introduce yourself to people who do not know you, and explain why you are running for school committee.
Okay, great, thank you. I agree. It was a year ago, and that was a amazing learning experience for me. So I moved to town 8 years ago. I was living in Montreal for 4 or 5 years before that, and before that I had lived in Atlanta for about 15 years. I had lived in Washington, D.C. I have worked in some global companies that have allowed me to travel the world, meet a lot of people around the world, get to really appreciate what people think outside of the United States, how they view us. And as I said last year, and I'll say it again this year, I found at the time that people everywhere really have way more in common than they have differences on. And the thing that is common, no matter where I went, whether it was China or India or Europe or South America, they want a better life for their kids. And I said this the other night at the candidate forum. And they all know that education is the key, holds the key to it. And so, you know, that's why I'm running. I'm running because a lot of the same issues that I had last year. I'll be talking about, frankly, a lot of the same things. I'll have a little bit different insight onto some of the topics, but many of the same things I ran for last year are still present. They're still present in our town. I don't think that they've been addressed. And, you know, running for government is somewhat scary experience. I get butterflies doing this, even the second time. And so you really got to want to do it. And I still think there's something that we have to accomplish. And frankly, the reasons I'm running are, and what I've come to discover is that our school committee, they're all great people. I mean, anybody that wants to volunteer to improve our schools and spend the time and dedication it takes to be on that committee needs to be applauded. I said last night, it's a contested election. It shouldn't be a contentious election. Right? We all want the same thing. This is back to it. We all want the same thing. But our school committee doesn't really represent a wider viewpoint. It has a very specific viewpoints on lots of things. And even the experience of the school board has a lot of similarity. We have, frankly, 2 candidates right now, all education background. Very, you know, again, to be applauded that they want to do that. But the fact that we can add to the school committee with somebody like myself who has a much different depth of experience and knowledge in which to draw on is going to make our decisions better. I mean, our school committee, our town government, all works better when it represents everybody and has a wide viewpoint. And so that's why I'm running. We're not representing those views. We're not representing the views of a lot of people like me who you know, have problems with how the school has framed a lot of issues. And so, you know, some of those issues I'm sure we're going to talk about. Right. And I'd say, you know, fundamentally, as I said last year and I'll say it again, is these are our children. the school is meant to serve the entire community. Not just the students explicitly, but the rest of the community expects a certain performance, expects a certain accountability, expects education, right? So they all pay for that. 75% of our community pay for the opportunity for the other 25% to use it. And the 25% to use it, they send their kids to that school for a very specific purpose. They want them to be educated in reading, math, science, history, and to the extent that we can't agree politically or socially on a given issue, well, that's what the rest of government is for. We don't need is the wrong word. When we can't resolve these things in our own community, there's a big difference of opinion, say, on something simple like who should run for president, right? We decide not to have the teachers tell the kids who they should vote for, right? For a very specific reason, because half the people in that room are going to disagree and the other half are going to agree, and the ones that agree probably want them to agree more. And so we don't want the teacher to be the adjudicator of these areas where we have these huge differences, particularly on social political issues. And so the fundamental reason I'm running is a lot of people like me, are seeing more and more requirement for political activization occurring in the school. Again, I have nothing wrong with parents activating their children into political causes. In fact, that's what our country is all about. Please go ahead and do it. Some parents don't want their kids involved in those things. So this is why school is fundamentally not supposed to have these things in the curriculum time. They can have extracurricular activities, they can go after school, they can form a club. All of these things I support. But we're not seeing that point of view. And so there's a lack of balance in our school committee, and that's why I'm running.
Got it. And you have been very critical of that school committee, and,
yes.
and on many fronts, and we'll talk about those. And the first thing you've sort of already answered this is that in a statement before, you've said that the school committee is not balanced, and clearly you've indicated how so. The other thing I thought about too, which is unique, if elected to the school committee, I believe you'd be the only member without children in the Scituate public school system.
That's a great question. So last year, my daughter was in the high school. And there were, and we're probably going to cover a lot of these things, but there were a number of things that happened along the way that ultimately led us to make a decision to take her and put her into private school. Some of those things I talked about them all last year, and we're talking about that. So I didn't agree with a lot of the political statements that their school committee made. I didn't agree at how they made them, but I found that it was permeated into the education, into the curriculum. And again, so I'll give you an example. So last year, my daughter, and this is just one of a few examples, but this is really kind of the example that changed my daughter's mind, because that was important too. She was part of that process. And I really didn't want to, right? So, and so as we were going through these things and different things started to happen, our minds started to change. And so for my daughter, the thing that we had happened that changed it, or a couple of things that changed it, is she was taking the end of the term. She took a history. She was taking history. She's doing really well in history. And the question, and I'm not going to get the exact phrasing of the question right, but the question was, have we sufficiently solved the problem of racism prior to 1900? And please provide examples why. Okay? And that was the only really question. That was the final question. So in addition to other things that were occurring, this was just another example of how we were requiring racism to be seen in every class. We were requiring our children to categorize everything and everybody, categorize themselves. And every class had to have something like this. So this was a history class. Okay, this is a good format for it. Okay, this is a question that has to have this component in it. Okay. So she chose to take the other side of the argument, which was basically we live in a country that gives us today. So the question was, have we today solved what the situation, from what it was prior to 1900? And she took the side of the argument and said, yes, fundamentally we have. And you got to pick any industry in which to make your examples. And she chose the entertainment industry in which to make her examples. And so she provided a lot of examples. One of the richest guys in Hollywood is an actor who started the studios down in Atlanta, where all the Marvel studios are from. His name escapes me. One of the actors and he's a black man, right? And so one of the actors who's got probably the highest, or one of the highest grossing films, series of films of all time, Samuel L. Jackson, black man. So she gave loads of these different examples. And so she got a C+ on the paper. Okay, she was getting it. It was an A. She was an A student at that point. She ended with a B+ in the class. She got a C+ on this thing. Again, this is just the final kind of end to lots of different things that were occurring. And the reason was she didn't give enough proof that we had sufficiently solved this. Well, fundamentally, the idea that all people are created equal is a principle and an ideal that is, to some would seem to be perfection, right? Will everybody always be always equal? The answer is no. Will you always be able to find something that says we haven't reached that perfect goal? Yes, right? To say that that was the reason why, that drove it home to her. Like, you didn't need me to do that, right? And so that, in addition to every night, I felt like I had to look over her work. We had to discuss. What did you talk about today? What exactly were you reading? Which book were you reading? It got tiring. It got tiring for her. It got tiring for me, right? So this was the final straw. And so it drove home to her. It's like, yeah, Dad, you're right. There's not a balance of opinion. Now, I'm sure the history teacher would have this isn't to condemn the grade or it's to drive home the point that it was everywhere. And if you were taking a different, what seems to be the contrary point of view in our school, you have a much higher threshold in which to achieve, in this case, a grade. And so that's what changed her mind, and that's what changed our mind, and that's why she's at a private school now.
Got it. Let's continue the academic talk and talk academic success. Unlike last year when you and I sat here, it was all about pandemic, the COVID. This time it's really academic success. And I think there's so much information, so many articles, ranks. When you formulate how you think Scituate Public Schools is doing when it comes to academic success, where do you get your information?
That's another good question. So what I did this year, as I prepared to come forward again, is I did a lot of research, and I got pretty much all of my data out of Mass DOE and DESE website. And the links are on my website, Taft for Scituate School Committee. And what fundamentally I thought is, well, first, and I said this last year, is that our current school goals really don't have a specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound goals. Its acronym is SMART. And our school committee has said frequently, we try to make SMART goals. I know what this concept is. Mm-hmm. But our current school goals don't have that in there. And in fact, the only goal that you have on the school committee, the current ones, they rewrote it this year, is the third one. So the third item here that deals anything close to academics. The Scituate School Committee is committed to providing staff and students with a healthy environment to learn and grow as we move away from the restrictions caused by the pandemic. We will accomplish this by working with staff and families to receive feedback on the level of schoolwork being completed outside of the structured class time. The committee will work with the district to set guidelines that ensure rigorous education and also provide students with healthy work-life balance. So that's as close as we get to academic excellence in the current school goals. My goal, if I was writing that, would be Scituate strives to be either first or second in objective measures determined by DESE or the school administration compared to the other 5 surrounding towns. So the other 5 surrounding towns are Marshfield, Duxbury, Hingham, Norwell, and Cohasset. And why those 5 towns? Because not just do they draw from the same demographic, so essentially the same demographic of kids, the same very fundamental demographic of people. Right? We can slice it, but we're all really kind of similar. We spend about the same amount of money per student on school. So we have a comparable that's relevant, right? And we can compare ourselves to those 5 districts. So, and then we can look at the performance. So to answer your question, I then went and looked at the performance. And I didn't just look at a year. I wanted to look at trends of data, because this is fundamentally where you're going to see a how we perform fundamentally against these 5 other communities. And what you find is on very basic measures, SAT, MCAS, AP scores, English language MCAS, math English language, almost in all of those, we're either the bottom one or the bottom 2. There's one where in a COVID year it was, I'm pretty sure it's MCAS math, where pretty much everyone came down and we were number 2 behind Hingham. But on every other one, we're either the bottom one or the bottom 2. And I didn't provide the graphs. It starts to get messy when you even look at compared to state averages. On a lot of them, we don't even higher than the state average. So this is then the goal. But the goal is to exceed the performance of the towns that draw from the same demographic, have fundamentally the same kids on objective measures, MCAS, SAT, AP. And look, if the school says, look, we have another metric that's objective, comparable to these other towns that we can use that will allow us to measure us, let's do that. I'm perfectly fine with that. But what you hear in our school committees frequently is we want to be a world-class school. Everyone wants to be a world-class school. But that's kind of like saying we want to be the best in we want to win the World Series, but we have a high school baseball team. Like, it's not relevant. You're not going to do that, right? It's laughable almost, right? If you can't beat the 5 people in your backyard, if you can't exceed their academic performance by objective measure, how could you reasonably expect that you're going to exceed a world-class measure, whatever it could be? So that's a very big difference in how I would view academic performance.
So listen, now that you have all where you're getting your information, this is a very broad question. How do you think the Scituate Public Schools, when it comes to academic success, how do you think they're doing?
As I would measure it from my perspective, right, we're not doing very well, okay? We're either the bottom one or the bottom 2. Right, there should be, and this is over a 5-year period. I'm looking at 5-year trends or 10-year trends, and I'm trending this data over that period. And it's consistently where not, and I put all these charts are on my website. Got Taft for Scituate School Committee. Go there, look at them. The data, it's hard. The thing is when you go to the Mass DOE site, the data's for a year. And then you can look at the next year and look at it. So it's really hard to well, I don't know, is that number a good number or a bad number, right? If you look at our AP scores in 2021, we didn't perform very well. It was really bad. And what I mean is everyone had a bad year, right? It was COVID, it was all these other things. I mean compared to a relevant average, mass average, national average, we had 5% of our kids pass the chemistry AP exam. The data is let's see, is like 50% when you look at AP performance for that particular class. Well, let's see, I have the data right here. We had 1 kid out of 20 pass the exam on chemistry. We had 26% of the kids pass the physics. The national averages on those are like 50 or 60%. When you look at our other towns, they're higher. And so the question isn't just to say, okay, we didn't perform here, right? The question is to say to our superintendent as a board member, okay, what are we doing to rectify that situation? So at the last school committee meeting that I attended, the school, they presented. They're going to present, they said, we're going to have 700 kids take the exam. That's great. We got 700 kids that are ready to take the exam. In our best year, looking over 10 years, about 600 kids took it. Last year, and this year, was about 500. The year before was about 460. So we increased the number of kids taking the test by 50%. And the reasoning was, kids who take the AP test generally perform better in college. Okay, I can agree with that. But that's a correlation searching for a reason, right? Of course, kids who take the AP test score better in college because generally speaking, AP kids have gone through the most rigorous other classes. They've taken all the honors classes. They've then progressed to AP, right? So yes, by virtue of the fact that they are the students that have progressed and have taken the most rigorous app, yes, as a general matter, they are. But before we decided to go 700 kids take it, did we correct the physics problem? Did we correct the biology? Did we correct the physics? Did we correct the calculus? Why did we not perform well? This is the board's job. No one asked these questions, right? It's fantastic that we increased it by 50%. Did we address the other things? We don't know. is the answer to that question, right? So this is how I would look at performance. This is how I would look at how the school committee holds accountable. I want them to have 700 kids all get 3s or better. It's a very high goal. It'd be very hard to do that. But I certainly want to know, what did we do to improve the performance in the areas where we really had a horrible year. And for math and science, it's a 10-year trend. If you look at a 10-year trend on AP performance for math and science, it's downward, significantly downward. On kids who pass, so that's a 3 or better, each credit that you get for an AP saves you between $500 and $2,000 a credit, because that's what it costs to send that kid to school, right? And so it's not just to help that kid get into college. It's not just to improve the rigorous applications, to make them a lifelong. It also has the benefit, it helps make college a little bit less expensive, right?
Let's talk curriculums real quick. Now, as a committee member, the school committee doesn't dictate curriculums, but they certainly have some influence. And I bring up curriculums because I was talking to a math teacher who was mentioning, like, with his curriculum, it's a fairly strict. Every single day it's this, you teach this, 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 this. And I'm wondering, when we think about curriculums, do you wonder if they're hindering teachers' abilities to be flexible with their teaching and make individualized learning?
I would think, at least in what I read, okay, and what I see, so I don't have the opportunity to, say, interact with the teachers the way the school committee might, but there seems to be a lot of flexibility in there. Now, if flexibility means you have to pass an objective test, and so there's always the concern. It's raised all the time. It's in the news all the time. Like, we're teaching to the test. Well, we got to have an objective measure, whatever it is. Okay, maybe the test isn't perfect, but we still have to have an objective measure. To the extent that that creates structure in the class and teachers feel like that makes it harder for them or impossible to them, I can't, but harder for them to be creative about what they teach, okay, that's a downside, possibly, but we still need to have an objective measure. Does that mean that we're restricting them too much? I don't think so. I think I think one of the places that we need to think about is, I think we get a lot of flexibility in lots of different classes and how we teach things. So I think there are a lot of examples of it.
Okay. Along with academic excellence comes personal excellence, and make sure that students feel equal and included, which leads us to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, Scituate Public Schools, I think, was really a front runner in this, and hiring of their DEI director, Jamil Adams, and became sort of a model for other school districts to look at. However, everyone did not necessarily welcome this and considered it more of a movement, sort of a left-wing liberal movement trying to push a woke agenda. What do you think?
That's the first time someone's phrased a question that way, only because it presupposes a conclusion. Is it woke? So again, my objection. So my interaction with this is we fundamentally framed the discussion around hiring a DEI director as to whether we were a systemically racist school system. Okay, you read I have it here. You read our schools. The first sentence says we want to create an inclusive environment that does not discriminate. Fundamentally, that's what the first sentence says. There is no one in Scituate that disagrees with that. 100% wholeheartedly agree with that. It then goes on to say, because, and I'm getting the exact wording, because the school system is currently systemically racist, we're going to do everything we can, and that includes hiring a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. So we have an anti-racist statement, so we chose to use the words anti-racist as the statement. Anti-racism, as I've said a million times before on my website, last night, or a couple nights ago, anti-racism is fundamentally a critical race theory idea. It believes, and all the people that write and use this term, it believes that you are either an anti-racist or a racist. And again, when you look at the diversity, equity, and inclusion books that are on the Scituate High School website, the resources they use to help us understand as a community what we mean by that, all the authors that are used there are all advocates, unabashed advocates for critical race theory, right? So these people are famous now. 2 years ago they weren't. Ibram Kendi, Robin DiAngelo, Tanisha Coates. There are, Robin DiAngelo's a white person, by the way. Some people don't know that. But there are plenty of black authors. So John McWhorter out of Columbia University. Thomas Sowell, right? Shelby Steele, right? They take a different point of view, different position when it comes to these concepts of racism, equality, and how it needs to be addressed. My point has always been, why can't we have some of these other kinds of authors? These are just the ones I've read, right? We have people with PhDs in our education department. You mean to tell me they could not find other books that speak to a difference of opinion from the same community, right? So black community that's endured racism for hundreds of years and over the last 60 years has seen tremendous progress. These authors that believe in critical race theory, one of their fundamental principles is they're incredibly pessimistic about the progress the country has made in this. In fact, they almost deny it. It's part of their thesis. Because if you are either an anti-racist or a racist, you take this binary view, well, you have a really pessimistic understanding of where we are today, right? These other authors do not. They believe these things exist, they believe these things, racism exists, and that it needs to be addressed, but they take a different point of view on it. We can't do that in our school. That was like a really simple one for me. I was like, well, why can't we do that? Has never happened.
Let's go back to systemic racism. You brought that up briefly. How do you define that, you personally?
I think actually you had, again, so we're all clear, you've sent me the questions.
Correct.
And I think the way you phrased it was an excellent way to think about it, which is, does it live? Does systemic racism live in our community? And that's a great way to think about it because it's organic, right? It's organic and it requires some kind of sentience. It requires some kind of explicit process in which you believe, by the virtue of the color of your skin, you are superior to somebody else. And you then execute a system of racism where you believe that yours is better, and you execute that system, in this case, our school. Well, by that definition, it doesn't exist. And that is most people's definition. That's not how critical race theory advocates define systemic racism. They believe it's kind of invisible, that it's just implicit, that, you know, to the extent that some metric that skews and doesn't wholly account for every group in the exact same way, in essence, equity for everybody, they get the exact same output, then that is de facto systemic racism. Those are the difference of opinions. That's how they define it, right? When you look at, so again, people like me believe, no, please tell us. Please tell us where you believe, school board, that systemic racism exists. Tell us. We want to fix it too. We want to know. We want to tell our kids, right? But they never did that. In fact, the very raising of that issue, when you define this as you're either an anti-racist or a racist, the people that raise the objection are racist by definition then. So what does that do? Well, it silences the rest of the community. Who wants to really engage in a discussion where the language is you disagree and you're a racist. So disagreement's now racism. This is why fundamentally I have a problem with the way we structured this, the way we tried to bring the community in.
Let's do a little timeline of this, and then we can move past this subject. But let's go back to October of 2020, and this is when the school committee released its anti-racism statement, and it included this controversial line, which you sort of referenced briefly. We commit to proactively uprooting the systematic racism that currently exists in Scituate public schools. That was in October of 2020. Let's go ahead 8 months later to June 7th, 2021. Systemic racism came up again in a public comment with a woman very arguing that this should not be in there. While this woman was making her comments, your opponent was texting with another school committee member.
Yes.
You were able to acquire that text message, and you posted it on your website,
I did.
On your campaign website, and it indicates that they either didn't know what they were talking about or just were confused. Let me start here.
Go right ahead.
How'd you get that text?
You know, it's It's a little bit of a story, but it's a great story.
I want to hear it.
In the May-June timeframe in Boston, there was a controversy that went on where one of the school committee members said something on an open mic that was anti-Asian, I believe is what it was. He couldn't pronounce the name right, and he said something to the effect that was really derogatory, and so he resigned. At the same time, in that meeting, other school committee members were texting amongst themselves, and they were saying derogatory things about white people, and I forget the exact nature of it. And this is the story broke in May. The incident happened like in the January timeframe, the December timeframe. This is 2021. Okay, so the story is out now in the paper, and the reason it was revived in the paper in 2020 is because now text messages, those text messages from the other members of the school committee, were released and printed by the Boston Globe. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that. To your point, I was like, wow, I didn't even know that. And what I discovered was, well, the reason the Globe was able to get it is because it occurred in a meeting. It's a requirement of public law. Public disclosure law says if you're doing this in a meeting, it has to be publicly disclosed. Because if you're not disclosing it, then you are in essence having a meeting without the public being part of it. That was like a shock. I was like, wow, I didn't know. It's like, to your point, I didn't know that. That's how far the public law, disclosure law went. And it goes so far as to say you're actually violating the disclosure law in doing that. It's like, wow. Okay, so fast forward to your June time frame, right? And so I read this, and I was fascinated by it. And and then June 7th, and I didn't actually attend that meeting, but I did watch it on recording a day or two afterwards. And I saw the conversation, and you could see there was something going on, kind of below the camera angle. And I just read this article. So I sent in a public records request. Please send me text messages from that meeting. That's how I ended up with the text messages.
Interesting. Okay, so let's basic question. Systemic racism, does it exist in Scituate Public Schools, yes or no?
It does not.
Let's move on. Sex education, when we talk about sexual orientation and gender identity, should that be taught in Scituate Public Schools, and if so, at what grade?
Okay.
Find your notes. I know we got a lot.
Again, you've given me the opportunity to prepare, given everyone an opportunity to prepare.
Nothing but time, Richard.
The page
all
here.
Good.
So thinking about it, look, this is another issue. So last year it was systemic racism and racism. This year it's gender identity, gender equality. How do we handle it in schools? And thinking about this, again, the first principle, the basic principle is we have to have a welcoming environment for our kids. We can't have kids intimidated, bullied. If my kid was being bullied in school, I'd be furious. I'd want to burn the place down, right? I mean, that is just where any parent is going to come from. And so I don't want that any more than anybody else does. We want to treat everybody with dignity, respect, compassion. I think, though, one of the things, again, kind of a difference of opinion, just like in critical race theory and how you can look at things differently, we are forcing our kids now to think of everybody as a category. Right? Everybody has a category, and if you don't have a category, you're kind of left out. That's not meant to dismiss, but this is the nature of, we're communicating to 5-year-olds. 5th graders, 6th graders, 3rd graders, right? And we're communicating to them to this very young age, and as you get up older, that they have to categorize everybody. Not only that, you have to categorize yourself. You kind of have to categorize yourself. And I think, that's kind of, I don't think it's necessary for a very broad group of our kids. Could we have an opportunity to engage in those kinds of topics as kids get more mature? Of course. But I was but thinking specifically about the topic of the day, which is transgenderism, and really that's really the topic. I mean, gay, lesbian acceptance has by and large is much different and has lots of progress in the last 30 years. We have gay marriage now, right? Again, all part of a society built on the fundamental ideal that we all get an equal right to, in this case, marriage. Transgenderism is now the latest, right? It's a new idea, frankly, for lots of parents. And so we're all struggling to understand it, right? And so recently there was a show, had Caitlyn Jenner on there. And so I thought about it in the context of what we're talking about. And so Caitlyn Jenner transitioned much later in life, was, for all intents and purposes, a well-traveled, well-reasoned, worldly person, lots of education, lots of exposure to different things. And as you watch that presentation, he would say that, one of the greatest things in his life was fatherhood, right? Being a father. And, but he also was, he was contradictory and confused and didn't know how to make out his own emotional feelings about, what it meant to be a man or to be a woman and to transition into being. So he would say, I would wear women's clothes when there was no one around, right? So, but he was, in the way he was communicating, at least, it's like he's confused. He's communicating some confusion, like, how do I do this, right? And what do I do about it? And he's an adult, again. So what that says to me is these are some really complicated topics. I think it's hard for a lot of adults, in this case, Caitlyn Jenner. Myself, I'll throw myself into that group, that need a lot of understanding here. So to say that we have to distill these things down and teach them at what grade? I think the jury is out on this. Do I think it's in the very youngest grades? No. Where do we draw the line? And this is where I get back to the fundamental principle of the community hasn't decided yet. Like, we don't have we need to have a discussion that's broad-based so that the community understands where we're going. We have to be very transparent about how we go forward. So I split these things basically into several buckets. There is social acceptance, which I talked about. We want to make sure that there's not a threat or an environment being created that makes those kids who are in the smaller percentage of students of identity, whatever this identity is, because there are 56 of them in the LGBTQ plethora, right? There's a lot of them, right? And so we need to first have social acceptance. I think everybody can agree with that. We need to also then have education on reproductive health, and sexual transmitted diseases, again, the fundamentals. Do we need to have education on sexual gratification, pleasure, over-sexualization of images? These things are in current Massachusetts books that are, again, is part of either compliance with or recommendations from DESE, right? I don't know if those need to be in our school system, right? And I certainly don't want them in 5th grade, right? And then there's the kind of the more fundamental academic discussion of what is gender theory and what is queer theory. These are the academic principles in which these are founded around. So, these are the different buckets of information that are out there. And so the first two, I think there's broad-based understanding and acceptance in the community to teach those things. The other two, well, depending on which one, exactly one we're picking here, there's not. And so those things, we should leave them to our parents. I mean, parents are educators. They may not be teaching the math class, right? But they're also the educators of their children. They are first and foremost, right, the place where their children are going to look to them for these kinds of issues. We shouldn't discount that. It's like, oh, no, the parent can't teach that. No, actually, they can. And in my case, I did. So this happened to me about 5 years ago. My daughter came home one day. I don't know how we got started. Oh, we were talking about something in the kind of the social media world. A singer or something had said something that she was queer, and okay. And my daughter said, "Yeah, Dad." She said, "Yeah, we learned what demisexual was." Isn't that she learned it? She said, "I said, well, do you know what that is?" Right? As a father talking over dinner, she said, "Well, there's demisexual, there's pansexual, there's polyamorous." My daughter was 12, okay, she's bringing this home. I said, "Did you get that?" She goes, I don't remember where I heard it from. Whether that's true or not, and she felt defensive, it was understandable, right? But the point here is, I said to her, having not done any of the research, I didn't go like I do now. Like I go and I look on Facebook and I find out all these. I'm trying to look for my notes right now. So I'm sorry, I'm looking kind of silly, so I can't find exactly. But anyway, so demisexual is someone that has an attraction. I wanted to get it right, but just off the top of my head. Demisexual is someone that has an attraction with that requires an emotional bond. That's what she said to me. I looked at the actual definition, but she pretty much had it right. And pansexual, who's someone who has sex with people without concern of gender. So it's fluid, it's kind of a fluid idea of sexual relationship. And then polyamorous is somebody who engages in sexual relationships and with multiple partners at the same time in open knowledge of it. So, I mean, we can think of, anyway, so she says this to me at 12, right? And I said, honey, I think you're kind of overcomplicating this a little bit. Not knowing anything about all the things that I've come to read since then. I said, let's simplify this a little bit. You're 12. It's not unusual for you to not have a sexual attraction to either sex or asex. It's just not unusual at all. You're 12. You're probably not. And let's try and stick with the basics. Why don't you just keep it? Do you really like and love somebody, right? What does that mean? Your mom and dad love you. So we have that discussion. So this is my point. I got the opportunity. Before this, it seems like a million years ago, but it wasn't that long ago. And then as she got older and we could talk, and frankly, because I ran last year, right, I got to talk more about these ideas. And we got to Wikipedia these things. We Wikipedia different people. We looked up, what is gender theory? What is queer theory? What are all these things? Where do they come from? Why do they exist? Who wrote about them? They're very sophisticated concepts. They are concepts that are taught in universities. I'm sure that in a university, even in today's universities, they're probably debated heatedly. Right? Is that really what we're trying to do in our school? And here's the thing. We need to be able to have these discussions. Right? Because our culture has gotten to the point where the mere disagreement is hate. Right? It's not principled disagreement where we can find a place to have common ground, right? Where we can find a place to create good process, we can find a place to create good principle, we can find a place where everybody can participate in our school system and we don't drive people out of the system. Right? The very idea of discussion and disagreement is fundamental to our country. It's fundamental to our policies. It's fundamental to our government. It's fundamental to our school. And if we can't have these kinds of discussions because one group thinks that you have to agree wholeheartedly with how I interpret the world, and you have to read the books I read, and you have to espouse the words I say 100%, then we're not going to have very good policy. And that's where I'm at.
Let's totally switch gears.
Okay.
Move to budget. The budget. Last year when you were here, if you want to find your notes. Last year when you were here,
I'm glad I'm remembering some of these things actually, because you see I have like pages and pages of stuff.
Anyway, all right, budget. Last year I asked you for priorities. Look, if you want to talk about some priorities, you can. Really, this is really what I want to know. School budget, huge. It is. When you approach that budget, how do you do it? Do you just start at the beginning and go to the end, or do you zero in on specific areas? I want to know your process.
Well, look, there's a couple of things about the budget, macro, that we have to recognize. The first one is, before we get to the details, the first one is our school system has an infrastructure capability and historically is maxed out not that long ago, 8 or 9 years ago, at about 3,200 students. Today we're at 2,700 students. So that means less demand. If you think about this in a market sense, from a business perspective, we have less demand from the service that we want to provide. In a business, you have to then rationalize that. It means you have to shrink something down in order to remain profitable. That's not true of government, right? Because our taxes have gone up. They're based on assessments, so we still have the funds in the system in which to support a lower service output at basically the same infrastructure. We have almost the same number of teachers. We have like 227 teachers now. We had like 240. Okay, so okay, about the same. I mean, it's less, but not less to the degree of the number of fewer students. So So there's that. Macro, you have to start there. So strategically, we have less service that's being provided, and we have the same infrastructure and the same costs. So what that really means that we've done is we've added more services, and we have. If you look at some of the things we've done, we've added language, loads more language classes. We've added to the arts, right? We've added to, look, we have added lots of AP curriculum. That's expensive. AP for teachers is rigorous, right? So that's what we did. So we added more services. We were able to do that because we had fewer kids, right? And that's what we did. That was an outcome. But when you look at the budget from a standpoint, what are the priorities in the budget? 80%, and I said this last year, say it again this year, it's the same true, 80% of it's personnel. So then you have to, so again, if you look at it from a manufacturing, marketing, business perspective, you then have to optimize, get the most productivity out of that 80%. Like we're providing more services now. So, and it's pretty much fixed. We negotiate with the union, we come up with a deal, there's a contract, it's not variable, right? You have to do, in general, I'm sure there's some, so you have to get the most productivity out of those people. So it's not a question like, oh, we're a 15% smaller district, I need 15%, you can't do that, right? You have to get more productivity out of the people, you add more services. So you have to invest in the professional development of those teachers, right? So there's only about 10% of the budget that has anything that we would closely resemble flexibility in it. And so that's what I would focus on. And actually in August of last year, I sent a public records request into the superintendent, and I said, I said, how much professional development did we do for social emotional learning or all the STEAM classes? So science, technology, engineering, arts, math, right? What were the professional development? We spent 0%, again, this is August of last year, I don't know how that might have changed, 0% on STEAM professional development for those teachers, and we spent 100% of whatever we had spent in that professional development to social emotional learning, diversity, equity, inclusion. Okay, so those were our priorities. That's what we did. But our output is other. So we have to, right, invest in those teachers and make them productive. And we have to do it with a very small amount of the budget, which amounts to 10% of the budget, $46 million budget, $4.6 million. Not an insignificant amount of money, but that's where it is. There's not a cut in the budget. Right? Our property values keep going up. That means more dollars going into the system, 2/3 coming out of that to the school system. So this isn't like in a business. What I'm trying to say, this isn't like in a business. As the demand for your service goes down, your revenue goes down. In this case, the demand for our service has gone down, 500 kids, but our revenue that we use to fund that has gone up. So we can still invest in these things, and the place that we need to invest is in those 80%. We need to get the most out of it. So back to like my AP question, right? Why did we have 5% of these kids pass this? There's no reason for it. Why did we have only 20% of them pass these other ones, right? There's no reason for it, right? I mean, there is a reason. When I say no reason, there's no systemic reason, right? There's a reason. I don't know what it is. That's what the school board should be asking. Why did that happen, and what actions can we take to correct it? That's where the budget is. So then you connect the budget with the deficiency. You connect the budget with the thing you're trying to optimize. We do this in business and manufacturing all the time. We ask 5 whys. 5 whys of manufacturing. Ask a question why 5 times, you will get to the root cause reason. We don't do this. Again, this isn't because these are brilliant. We have some brilliant people on, PhDs on our school committee, right? People that have been in education for a long time. They have good, in fact, if you go onto a webinar and listen, 80% of the people sometimes on there are from the school system in one shape or form. We don't have a perspective that says, well, why 5 times? Let's get to the root cause, let's create a plan, and let's address those things.
Let's take the facilities portion of that budget, which I think is about 3.74% of that. Facilities is a big topic with the discussions surrounding combining Hatherley and Cushing elementary schools into one elementary school. Are you in support of that?
Lacking something other than that, lacking some other alternative, some magic pill that comes out of the feasibility study. I see no way around it. Because again, you have to kind of go back and you have to look at, why do we have them? Well, we had 3,200 kids in the school, right? And look, the great thing is that they're right around the corner from almost everybody's house. That wants to go to that school, man, you can just about walk to them. And my goodness, that would be a terrible thing to get rid of, right? But, so an alternative that was proposed that I saw, that someone said, is okay, well, we'll have 2 schools that are K through 3, or K through 2nd grade, and we'll have 1 consolidated school that's 3 through 6. I heard that, saw that someplace. Whether that's a solution or not. So, okay, all right, let's explore that thought for a second. These schools are 50 years old. They were renovated not that long ago. I mean, 20 years ago. That was a long time ago. Some people were never alive, right? But just 20 years ago. Still, you know, that's, so we've kind of pushed the envelope of what these facilities have done for us. I mean, we've, you know, kind of reached their max life. So, again, back to the solution. The solution is we keep them neighborhood schools as an idea, right? At a split grade level, and then we consolidate them later in a cohort, 3 through 6 or 4 through 6, whatever it is, right? Okay, well now we then have to renovate 2 schools and build a 3rd one, the consolidated school, right? Well, that's a lot more expensive. I suspect, my intuition would tell me, having been in construction for a really long time, that that's way more expensive than building 1 consolidated school. So, and the numbers that are being thrown around right now for a single consolidated school, $85 million. I think it was Hingham just built a school, $110 million, right? So these are big numbers, right? And I don't think, just like the water treatment facility, I think when we show up at that town meeting, just like we did the water treatment facility, everybody knows that we need to do this. We're arguing about the details. Do we want it in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, right? So when we start talking about a school infrastructure, we want to add a school, right? Yeah. Really what we're saying is we need to improve the quality of facilities that we have. What's the most cost-effective way to do that? I don't know. Providing 3 facilities is a lot more expensive than providing 1. So it becomes really a necessity of, like, this is what we have. And we have, again, like 500 less kids. That's 1 whole elementary school. 1 whole elementary school of population that we that we used to support that we don't have to support now.
By the way, everyone does not want this. When the superintendent went before the select board, select board member Andrew Goodrich was extremely critical of this plan, essentially saying, look, the buildings still could work, but you have not taken care of them. So why would we approve making a new one and making sure you take care of that?
He's
what
right.
do you think?
I mean, he makes a good point. Whether he's right, whether we have to build another school or not, again, we're going to spend $1 million, the cost of putting a new roof on a new school, right? We're going to spend $1 million on a feasibility study to help us understand this. We all decided to do that. We need to get that information. Again, could that come back and say, you know what, town, Scituate, you could renovate these 2 schools and bring them up to class, okay? And I mean the current academic performance of class, facilities class, for $60 million, right? And, or you could build a brand new one for $85 million. My working assumption right now is that we really can't. Like, we really can't bring up to class these 2 existing schools for the same price it would cost to have 1 single school. I suspect it would be more. But to the extent that that's wrong, that underlying presumption is incorrect, well, yeah, I would want to really dig into a neighborhood, keeping the schools neighborhood schools, right? Because I keep coming back to we have a lower population of service, right? So I don't, so the answer to this question is in the nuts and bolts. It's in the dollars and cents. Andrew is making a good point, but we don't have all the information right now. And lacking that, I'm more apt to agree that we need to, and again, based on the population change of the school, more apt to agree that, yeah, no, we're going to have to consolidate something. But I'm open-minded to say, I'm willing to say I'm wrong.
Let's talk communication. How do you think the school administration does at communicating with parents, teachers, staff, students?
So there's a couple questions here. So I think that as a general matter, on things that, on a lot of things, they have provided more information. So like line items on a budget. There's more line items on a budget. I actually think Ms. Driscoll, the job that she does for the superintendent and the way that she's communicated a lot of thoughts has been more transparent. That doesn't mean I think that all the all the communication is transparent. What I really mean is at kind of the operational school level. So when my daughter was in the school system, it felt really hard for me to understand exactly what the curriculum is about. Again, back to the question of like, I had to look over, we had to talk about, because there was a lot of ideas that were being presented that I wanted to make sure I was communicating what I thought about them, right? And it was really hard for me to understand exactly what was being taught. Like, exactly what did you mean? Like, what was the thing? What was the book? What was the lesson plan really going to cover? It's really kind of, yeah, there's a link. It's behind a firewall, right? It's still not really descriptive. The descriptions are general. So with respect to that, it could be much better. With respect to like reporting up information in a school committee meeting, again, I wasn't here under the previous or didn't participate a lot. I think generally speaking, the principal and assistant superintendent, I shouldn't say principal, superintendent, assistant superintendent, do a good job. I like listening to like what they talked about in the last meeting. I think they're fairly organized, and I mean down to the principal level when you listen to them.
Scituate loves to use Facebook to communicate information and much, much more. The Scituate Public School Administration has opted not to have a Facebook page. Good choice or bad choice?
I'm not a super fan of, I communicate by Facebook as part of the campaign apparatus. But I'm not a super fan of Facebook or social media fundamentally. And the reason is that it's viewed as a place in which we share ideas of things. And it's not, as a practical matter, it's not. It's a place where we actually make statements about things. And we type our 2 sentences and then we've thrown them, like that's what I did. Just throw those 2 sentences at the school on the Facebook page and I did it. Did what I'm going to do, I'm going to work, right? And and from what I've seen, that's not getting us to a solution. It's not even very clear many times. Did you mean this or did you mean that, right? And so, do we need a Facebook page? Do we need a Facebook page to talk about things that we have to, like there's a ball game, right? There's a debate. There's a play. Yeah, we all go. A lot of people use it, so we want to communicate those things. So I don't go to the site. So I can't give a lot of intuition. To the extent that it's used as a means to communicate things about the school, other than, kind of the perfunctory things, it's not a great place to communicate.
At the end of the day, the most important thing, of course, are those kids. And just like last year, you know what we're going to do? We're going to get some student voices in here. Here is your question from an elementary school level.
Oh, wow.
Hello, my name is Brady Sumchenko, and I'm a 2nd grader in Wampatuck Elementary School. Who is your favorite elementary school teacher?
Who was one of your favorite elementary school teachers? I mean, that kid, Brady.
I have had a chance to think about this a little, so I'm cheating a little bit because I have thought about it a little bit. But, I would say in elementary school I had a few teachers that I liked, that I remember. Now, I'm old, so it was a long time ago. I would say, so Mr. LaRue in 5th grade. Mr. LaRue in 5th grade introduced me, to the extent that we could say introduce somebody to reading at 5th grade, right? But I would say introduced me to the potential enjoyment of reading in 5th grade. And what he would do is he would get to school, and we had 30 kids in our class. 30 kids in class. He would read the book in the front of the classroom for an hour, whatever the book was. And generally the books were either Nancy Drew or the Hardy Boys. And the thing about those books that made me interested in reading is they always ended a chapter on a cliffhanger. Nancy knocks on the door, right? And what is, something like that. And then, gotta wait till tomorrow, right? And so, wow, this is like really cool. You can get that out of a book, because I'm used to reading the things that we did no interest in, right? I don't know what they were, but I'm sure they were things like, whatever, how to conjugate a sentence or whatever. And so, wow. So of course, I don't want to get too, but I had a single mom, So we had a single family. We didn't have a lot of money. You know, I scraped my pennies together, and I forget what they were. They might have been $5. If $5, it was probably a lot. Maybe it was $3. I don't know, but it was a lot of money to me. And occasionally we'd end up at the store. I'd end up buying a Nancy Drew book or Tom book. So that's how I got into books. That's how I got into reading. And so that's one. That's one. I mean, I have others, but that's one.
Good, but I just want to point this out, and I think this is important for all teachers, but really elementary school teachers, that the impact they're having is lifelong. I think the majority of people can almost name every single elementary school teacher they've had.
And I have, and I can. Like this was a stump question. Like you asked me, and I couldn't remember it. It took me. I had to I walked and said, oh my God, how could I have forgotten? Mrs. Kennedy in second grade. How could I have forgotten Sister Ruth in third grade? How could I have forgotten Miss Green in how could I have forgotten Mr. LaRue, right? And well, because I don't know, because I just left me. And also the question was last year was who most affected you, which was like, oh, the most.
Yeah, deep.
Yeah.
Deep.
Oh,
a little too deep.
I don't know. And of any teacher, it's like, oh man.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's a kind of a different. And so, to your point, though, they all do. Like, I can remember little bits and pieces, like, they all did this, like the thing about Mr. LaRue. Like, I remember second grade, I moved up from Florida, because when my parents separated and we moved back to, her family supported, my grandma and all that stuff. And I was a terrible student. I was failing everything, right? Came out of Florida public school system, which at the time was really awful. Right? And came up to a New England school system, which was more rigorous, and I was failing everything. I mean, I come home, didn't feel too good about what was going on. I don't know if I cried or not. Probably did. And she said, "Look, Richard," she said, "we all learn different. You're going to get it. You're just going to get it at a different pace." And that's what I remember about Mrs. Kennedy.
That's great. From elementary school to the high school, here is your high school question.
Hi, my name is Serena Condon. I'm a junior here at Scituate High, and my question for the candidate is, what was your best and worst subject in high school?
Admit it. What were they? Best, worst?
Best class. I ended up going to engineering school, and people thought I was good at math and science. So I did have decent grades in math and science. Did I like math and science? Different question, right? I didn't really. And did I really like math and science? I was good at it. I got good grades at it. Did I really like it? That's a different question. What of the sciences, though, the ones that I liked, the one I liked the best was chemistry. I told you why I didn't do anything in chemistry in college, it's a whole different discussion. Probably had to do with stupid things that people do when they're in college. But probably chemistry enjoyed the most. I would say
your worst?
I really liked, I would say, of the other ones, I would say history. I always liked history, but I didn't really partake of that as a college because I was like, well, no one makes money, learning history.
Yeah.
Well, I discovered that's not true either, but, such as the thoughts of a youngster, right? So those are things I kind of liked. What I didn't like, I guess I'm kind of stumped. I would probably say if I had to pick one, it would probably have been, like math. Probably didn't like calculus a whole lot. Now I'm thinking about it. I can't say I really liked trig a whole lot either.
The dread comes back.
Yeah. But I could do it.
Yeah.
That's different.
That's great. That's great. All right, listen, Richard, one more time. Why should Scituate voters vote for you on May 21st?
Well, look, the reason that they should vote for me is we need some different perspective. We need it for the best reasons for our community. We need it because it makes our policy better. We need it because it makes our desire for accountability better. We need it because there's a lot more people in the community that deserve good answers to questions that currently we're not asking. And again, it's not because the people on the committee are bad people. They're very well intentioned and they're very diligent. It's just that we are really well represented in one kind of skew of thought, which is education. We have a lot of educators in our school committee, relatively speaking, that have education or are influenced by educators, and then we have the whole education system which shows up and participates in all that. We needed some different perspective. We need somebody that's going to dig in and do their homework. Like I said, I went through 10 years of DESI data. I go through and I read up on all these things. I really want to understand why we're talking about different subjects in the way that we're talking about it. I'm going to ask for information on professional development. Like, what exactly does that mean? Where are we getting our professional development? What's it look like? Does that mean I'm selecting the professional development? No. It just means I'm going to ask for questions. I'm going to ask for accountability. Did we have a problem as it relates to academics? Say, as I've said already, I'm going to ask questions in a way that I have to answer them in my job, which is, okay, why? Why did it happen? What was the corrective action? Have we fulfilled those corrective actions, right? The job of a school board member isn't to just be a cheerleader, right? The school board members are probably the ones that want most for the system to succeed. But really their job is to look over the horizon and determine if that light we see is the sun rising or a train that's going to run us over, right? And you can only get that by having different perspectives and by having people ask just different questions. And that's why you should vote for me.
Richard Taft, always good to see you.
Thank you very much, Seth.
All right, and remember that election, May 21st, 8 a.m., 6 p.m., Scituate High School gym.